Now before I start this video, I want to give a shout out. I was watching Nerdword Entertainment's video on the top 10 Sonic moments, and at the beginning of his video, he says that he loves seeing Sonic, a primarily gaming icon, go above and beyond with his story, presentation, and characters. This video, much like that one, is going to explore that concept, albeit on a more microcosmic scale. I highly recommend that you watch this video too, as his list goes in depth with reasons beyond simply what happens in the scene, but what they stand for as a whole for each character therein. Now then, shall we begin? Sonic the Hedgehog was revolutionary without really adding much. It's been confirmed that the conception of Sonic came from speedrunning World 1-1 of Super Mario Bros. Over and over and over again. And yet, the release of Sonic the Hedgehog shook the gaming scene forever. It was like Mario, but with something more. In this case, he was faster, and he had an attitude. And boy did that sell in the 90s. It was the era of attitude. So Sonic built an identity as the anti-Mario, and Sega furthermore built an identity as the anti-Nintendo. Similar enough to compare, but different enough to contrast. The two franchises and their companies would end up duking it out in an age that would become known as a console wars. And eventually Mario would come out on top, with Sonic now renting out house on his system. And yet, there was something that Sonic had that Mario didn't, and it's still that way to this very day. And that thing is storytelling. Granted, these things weren't exactly present in his early titles, but that's because it was a different time back then. You won your audience over with the game's more practical features, like blast processing and stuff. A lot of games out there were one and done because of a lack of interest, and if a game started to feel like a book, well, that's a quick trip to bankruptcy. But when Sega was able to strike gold not just once with Sonic the Hedgehog, but twice with Sonic the Hedgehog 2, they had more than established themselves in the market. The people had fallen in love with Sonic and were eagerly awaiting his next clash with Dr. Eggman, and this time, Sega had all the support in the world to tell a fine story. And so, they made what's arguably their most legendary outing. With the advent of Sonic 3, and furthermore its and Knuckles continuation, Sega had developed a brand new way to convey storytelling for the series. For one thing, they introduced level transitions. Initially, when you beat a stage, Sonic would just exit stage right, from a yard of springs, the outskirts of the city, to some underwater labyrinthine ruins, and then to some rooftops in the heart of the city. Sonic 2 would have you in a nuclear chemical plant on the outskirts of a city, to some underwater ancient ruins, and then at a casino in the heart of the city. Like, where's the context in that? And why'd it happen twice? Now, whenever you beat an act in Sonic 3 Knuckles, Sonic's like, haha, yeah! And then the adventure just keeps going on from there. It's just a seamless transition. Result screen, Sonic pose, go. Even more so, when you beat an entire zone, a little cutscene explains how you go from one area to another. It's little gestures like these that really solidify the atmosphere of Angel Island. Makes you feel like you're actually on a ginormous landscape with various trophic levels instead of a bunch of discrete and disconnected stages. But what's most important is that those little cutscenes stood as major points in the game's story. These cutscenes do more than just introduce levels, they also work as silent pantomimes to show off some very important stuff. I mean, right out the gate, as soon as you start up a file, the game establishes that you still have the Chaos Emeralds from your last adventure, as showcased by Super Sonic. I mean, he's pretty much God mode. And then this happens. Meet Knuckles, the most important character in the game, also known as this frickin' guy. This character in one game effectively trumps Eggman in terms of who you prioritize as your main enemy. Every time you see Eggman, you're all like, I wonder what machine he's gonna whip out this time. But every time this freaking guy shows up, it's just, You're just minding your own business, running through the level, stomping on badniks, and then he just ruins your day. Climbing this tower? Nope. Enjoying the carnival? Nope. Even when you're doing your usual exit stage right shtick, he's just right there, waiting for you. So this guy screws you over for the entire first half of the adventure, and each time there's always something stopping you from spin dashing this guy to another galaxy, be it a solid brick wall, or an invisible one. Even when he's in launch base, he still gets one last pot shot in before slipping into the harbor and calling it a day. You really had no input on that one either way. It seems like a small victory over his usual obstructions, but you'll know he'll be back, and he'll be waiting for your turn. Essentially, this game is just building up to this grand moment where you and him will finally face off, mano a mano. Conan Zoro. However, Knuckles isn't so cut and dry. He's got an actual backstory and, get this, a reason for slowing you down this whole game beyond him just being a jerk like that. You see, he's the fated guardian for this island, and he's tasked with stopping anybody who just muscles their way on in. You know, like hedgehogs with god mode powers who just tear through the jungle. You gotta keep an eye out for that. And why not Eggman though? Well, because he crashed down here after the events of the last game and was all like, "Beware the blue!" But more on that later. Now, here where things get a bit interesting. Sonic 3 & Knuckles is the only classic Sonic title in the series to add lore. That is to say, it's the only title to introduce a new, canonical element to the universe in a substantial and actually relevant kind of way. In this case, the Chaos Emeralds are actually native to Angel Island, Knuckles' homeland. They are the treasure of the island, and are in complete subservience to the Master Emerald. Otherwise, the Emeralds are always just there. You didn't really know a thing about them, except that they've got a whole lot of power and, well, don't let Eggman have them. Now you can see that these things, like Angel Island, belong to Knuckles. And they've been gone for quite a while. And look who's the guy walking in with those since missing emeralds. Now here where things get amazing. If you've been playing your cards right, you'd be collecting the Chaos Emeralds throughout the adventure. After all, you were Supersonic earlier and you want to get that power back, regardless of whatever this Knuckles guy has to say about it. Well, midway into the adventure, you see Knuckles suspiciously trying to conceal something, and up until this point, he's always had the advantage. Now's your chance to get a leg up on him by getting to whatever he's trying to keep hitting. Thus, you come to this place. It seizes the emeralds from you, and creates these gigantic super emeralds. Throughout each trial, you can unlock more power in the Chaos Emeralds, and by the 7th one, you gain the power of Hypersonic. Now check this out. When you fight Knuckles, in the background there's a prophecy of an empowered hedgehog battling a man of sorts for the Master Emerald. That's you, and that's only if you've been getting those Chaos Emeralds. Furthermore, and this is a bit of a trivia kind of thing, but in the high reaches of Hydrocity, you'll find these statues, very, very small, but in distance, they're actually replications of Sonic. Yeah. Now, take another look at this from Knuckles' perspective. This tapestry has been here forever. Long before Knuckles was born, and henceforth long before Sonic and Eggman's encounters as well. And yet, those two are both presented in the weavings of prophecy, fighting over a soul gem. This trophy is the Master Emerald, and all Knuckles knows is that he has to make sure that it's safe no matter what. He can gather no conclusions on who's good nor who's evil in this clash of two entities, only that he has to make the right judgment when it happens. And since Eggman got to him first, looking quite sympathetic after a major defeat, well, we all know how that story ends. And thus, how this one began. But after you fight Knuckles in the most anticlimactic way possible, he bails out to investigate what's going on just off screen. And it's Eggman, jumpstarting his master plan, pulling a heist on the Master Emerald and getting the Death Egg back in the sky. This is the point where Knuckles comes into conflict as to who he's to believe in now, ultimately siding with you. He opens the way to give chase, but is too winded from both the smackdown that you bestowed upon him and the electroshock treatment Eggman applied to the subsequent wounds. Thus, the two of you make up, and you set out to do what you do best, stopping Eggman. Now think, at face value, these aspects of the game story can be completely overlooked due to how stealthily they were injected in during a time that wasn't really looking for them in the first place. For one thing, I myself never noticed how in-depth the story was. I was so locked into expecting the premise was going to be Sonic fights Eggman again, and that's exactly what I took out of it. And Knuckles. And if you consider how the game begins, plays, and ends, it can feel like that. After all, you fight Eggman the most, and he is the villain. Knuckles could have been a lackey for all I cared, but there was so much more. And in a day and age that values stories in video games far more than it used to, I'd say that Sonic 3 & Knuckles has aged well because of it. And the best part about all of this, Sega, and furthermore Sonic Team, never had to do any of this. At the time of these games, Sonic was at the best of his reputation. He had a winning formula from a gameplay standpoint, but the developers went a step beyond to craft a winning reason for playing this game. That kind of stuff was usually brushed aside at the time, and it was generally accepted to do so. Take a look at Sonic's then gaming competitor, Mario. Those games almost never took that kind of chance. What was the story for Mario in his Donkey Kong debut was effectively rinsed and repeated for over 25 years. Sure, there were some byways to try something more, but never canonically so. There was almost never a form of universe expansion that might officially change the Mario universe, even if the characters were given personality traits like Luigi's frightfulness or Bowser's hot-headedness. Mario was never really given such treatment. That's because Nintendo was, and still is, in fear of alienating a potential audience. And thus the core of the game series didn't change either. There's always a status quo. Whenever that status quo was challenged, the events of the story would either revert it or relegate it to a separate universe, like the ones where Mario and Bowser get along well enough to race in go-karts and play tennis. But Sonic games dared to be more. They dared to create something new through the means of storytelling across various adventures. They dared to risk the status quo in hopes of adding to the mix, like acknowledging one's limits and the values of those around you, or coming to terms with one's own mortality, yet living life to the fullest. And because of these forays into experimentation, we've learned and accumulated so much about the characters. Each of these adventures, for better or for worse, molded the characters into who they are. Looking at just Sonic, we can see that he's cocky in attitude yet valiant in cause. He's there to save the day and have a good time while doing it, but he's smart enough to not let it be the other way around. He can be that paragon of casual steadfastness, yet the same guy you'd want to have a heart-to-heart with. Why? Because he's not one-dimensional. His personality doesn't begin and end with one word, and neither does yours, mine, or anybody's. Rather, it's an amalgamation of his actions during his many experiences that all come together to make a reflection of who he is. And these experiences came from the developer's decisions that varied up the circumstances of each tale. Hence, as a character, Sonic is Sonic because he was allowed to grow in multiple facets. So, with all that said, craft on, good writers of Sonic. Create, diversify, and expand the various universes, from the games, to the shows, comics, and maybe even beyond. And I'll gladly experience as many as I can.